So I've been coming to this conference since the very first one 11 years ago. Back then I reported into Jim Hall, and I told him I was coming to the conference, and I remember him saying, "Rob and I look forward to you sharing your learnings. I hope you're not going to expense that." A lot of things have changed since then. I can no longer read the teleprompter without my reading glasses. But a couple of things have stayed the same. And one of the most challenging parts of being a presenter at this conference is Mitch asks you to find a topic that you can present to in 10 minutes, preferably less, he'll say. And I always rack my brain every year. What topic can I cover that I can do top to bottom thoroughly in less than 10 minutes? And you know, you're going to see me do that in about 9 minutes and 50 seconds from now when I introduce Kevin Lashuk. But for now, I'm going to present on improving medicines for children, and I just want to do a quick, I don't have clickers, but you can put your hands up for this if you want to do audience participation. Which of the following has been around longer? Mallinckrodt, Canada, you know it's Canada's 150th anniversary this year. Germany, Italy, or Ronnie Miller? Now, the analytical mind might say, well, Canada, Germany, Italy, what do you mean by being around longer? But I'll let you just decide. So, show of hands, who in the audience thinks Mallinckrodt's been around longest of all the things on this slide? Nobody? Okay. Canada, 150 years for Canada. Germany as a country. So nobody has any, I guess I know where the answer is going here. Italy. And Ronnie Miller. Nobody actually said, don't know what E is. So the answer to the question is actually Mallinckrodt. We hit our 150th birthday this year. The company was incorporated in St. Louis in 1867. So although it's a close tie with Ronnie, it is Mallinckrodt on that one. So I'm going to give you a few slides. The next few slides are going to talk about a disease in Canada that you might not know that much about. And so if you looked at the slide here, which is the disease incidence rankings, the orange bar I want you to pay attention to in the next couple of slides. This is the second most common disease in the country. And on this slide, you'll see that it is the healthcare costs are third most expensive healthcare costs in the country. And on this slide, you'll see that the mortality from this disease is the third highest in the country behind Canada and ischemic heart disease. And also you might not be surprised, or you may be surprised to know that not one pharma company in this country or anywhere else actually has a drug or anything in their pipeline to address this disease. Now, the disease is preventable safety incidents, and if you've been to this conference before, you've heard me talk about it. Unfortunately, it's not getting any better, it's getting worse. And you may have seen this article in the Toronto Star this year. And I've tried to put a bit of a call to action that we should maybe try to do something about this when you have something that is one of the highest healthcare costs, one of the highest prevalence, and one of the highest drivers of mortality in our country. Why are we not doing anything about it? And of course, in this room, how can we do something about something so big? So I'll boil it down into maybe some smaller bites for you. And maybe we'll just look at the children. And you could say to me, Robin, how can we do anything about this baby who unfortunately died? And Sick Kids is a world-renowned children's hospital, is one of the greatest in the world, and certainly a leader in patient safety in this country. But mistakes happen. They always happen when you have people interacting with patients, medical technology, and drugs. So perhaps you're right. Maybe there's nothing we can do about something like happened in this case. But where's the problem the biggest then? Well, the problem is the biggest in our children. And if you look at the kids that are being admitted to hospital, 1 in 25 of those, if you had a child that was admitted to hospital, 1 in 25 chance that you're going to have a serious preventable safety incident. More than 9% of the children that are admitted to hospitals experience an adverse event. Those events increase when they're surgical patients, and they increase more when they're in an ICU versus not in an ICU. But you can say the same thing. Well, these are hospitalized patients. Robin, how can we actually do anything about safety incidents in the hospital? Well, perhaps you're right. Maybe I'll try to bring you to a place where we can interact, or what we do. And this is the medicines that we provide to our children. In 2014, a landmark report in Canada called Improving Medicines for Children, which is where I got the title for this talk. And I talked a little bit about that back then, and I'll give you just some statistics about what's happening. You might be surprised to know that children are not the same as adults, although medically we often just treat them when we administer a medicine as a small adult. Take the dose, cut it in half, because they're half the size. That probably makes sense, but it doesn't really work that way. A study on 1 million Canadian children shows on average they take about 4 medicines per year. 4 medicines a year in 1 million patients. Now, there are super users in there, though. Only about 20% of those patients really drive that. Most of our children don't take any medicines per year. But about 20% are taking 10 or more. And maybe that's where we can focus our efforts. 60 to 70% of all the medicines in Canada prescribed to children are off-label. And this is where the problem is coming from. When you're prescribing off-label, cutting the doses in half, polypharmacy to patients with chronic complex diseases, adverse events happen. When adverse events happen, kids get hospitalized. When kids get hospitalized, more bad things happen. So what has been done since this report in 2014? Quite a bit has been done. Although I don't know if we've done a whole lot in this room, but I met with these folks on Monday morning, and it's a national research organization representing the 17 children's hospitals in the country. It's called KidScan, and they're very interested in meeting with industry. And so if you think that pediatric trials is something that you want to do, we have a national framework that can allow this to happen. It did not exist before 2017, 2016 perhaps, but they're ready now, and they've got 4 pediatric trials on the go, and they're looking at partnering with industry to try to bring high-quality, speedy research to maybe bring more indications or more medicines to your children. What else has happened? The hospital in St. Justine, which is one of the largest children's hospitals in the country, has got a large grant from the Goodman family to set up a pediatric formulation center. And you might think, well, this has really nothing to do with us, but I challenge you to take a look at this slide and go on their website, because one of their mandates is they are going to be looking at medicines that are used or approved in other countries around the world, but are not approved in that dosage or indication in Canada. And they're going to be exploiting regulatory pathways and their own research capability to bring those formulations to children in Canada. They are also looking for industry partnerships, and one of the smart things they did is they took an industry veteran and put her in as the general manager of that foundation. So I would suggest if you haven't looked at that, you might want to look at it, because they are going to be bringing new medicines to Canada, and some of those might actually be ones that your company already markets in other countries. So on the national scale, what's been happening? The Canadian Pediatric Society released in 2017 their new strategic framework, and I don't expect you to be able to read that slides, but I'll take out the one that you might be most interested in. Pillar number 4 is expanding access to pediatric medications and therapeutics, and you'll start to see in there that they're going to advocate for increased life-saving medications. A lot of people here are working in the rare disease area. The Canadian Pediatric Society is announcing now that this year that they're going to take that on and advocate for increased life-saving medicines. This is at a national level, and they have significant advocacy clout behind them. What else has been happening? Dr. Kadri mentioned this, and I know the government takes a lot of hits often, but I think we should give them kudos where they're due, and they've introduced, as of January 1st, 2018, something called OHIP Plus, although I would recommend that the government continue to work with key stakeholders at the children's hospitals and the Canadian Pediatric Society to make sure that we get OHIP Plus correct. So we did mention that there was more than 4,000 drugs that are currently on the ODB formulary. These will all be covered for kids that are, not kids, but for people 25 and under. And there's a split there, right? You've got pediatrics for 18 and under, and then you've got that other group of 25 and under. All of these drugs will now be covered for them. There's 4 million people currently covered on ODB right now, cost about $5 billion. OHIP Plus will cover another 4 million people. There will be some overlap in those numbers for just under $500 million more. So here's one of the things, though. You take 4,400 drugs. Now, only 1,200 different drugs were prescribed to those children. I told you about that study in 2003. Many of those drugs are not suitable for children. Many of them are contraindicated, and many of them should not be on an OHIP Plus formulary. So what the better idea would be is to start this OHIP Plus formulary January 1st, but strip it down, and let's get the 100, 200, or 300 most necessary drugs for these pediatric patients so that they get the appropriate medications. You also might want to check into the fact if you have a PLA already with ODB. If you do, you're probably in place to lose significant revenue when OHIP Plus starts to cover that product, including your PLA. So all of that to say is, why should I care about any of that? You might not, but I think that there is a revenue upside to you if you do. You can continue to spend your time with organizations like this. Other people will tackle these guys in more detail than I will. And you may have seen this come up recently, that the orphan drug framework doesn't seem like it's going to be going anywhere. So we can continue to work in areas like that with organizations like that, or we can say maybe pediatrics is the place to go. Precision medicine, individualized medicine is probably something you've heard about. And if you take a look at now, we can see which drugs somebody is likely to respond to based on their genetic makeup. And genetic makeup starts with kids. Pediatrics and genetic makeup is where most of this research is going to go, and I heard a researcher say this week, in the future we won't need adult physicians, pediatrics are going to rule the world. So, if you don't think that you're in pediatrics, take a look at your pipeline, because anybody that's in the world of genetic medicines right now, it's all starting in peds, and so if you don't know that you're there, you're going to be there 10 years from now. I'm happy to share this space with some other people in this room, but for now, I'm happy to own it for ourselves as well. Thanks, everybody.